Hey everybody, Mike Iaconelli here. Welcome to a brand new edition of In the Shop. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. We're not in the shop, but it was nice out today. It's getting cooler. Fall is right around the corner. So we're going to be doing today's In the Shop on the water. For today's topic, we've got a really good one for you today. And it's a category of a bait, a category of a lure that doesn't get talked about a lot. So I'm excited to talk to you about wake baits. Wake baits. I've got a bunch of different ones here, but we're going to be doing today's In the Shop on wake baits. First thing I want to talk about is, what is a wake bait? What is a wake bait? Wake bait is generally a hard-bodied lure, right? A plug style lure. But it's designed to stay on the surface to a foot, probably no more than a foot below the top. So when we're talking about wake baits as a category, we're talking about hard lures, hard treble hook baits that have very short, stubby, almost totally vertical bills on them. And that super short, stubby, vertical bill helps to keep this lure very high in the water column. Wake baits are such a unique category because they do a tremendous job of staying in a zone in the water that doesn't get fished a lot, right? Think about what that wake bait's doing. It's just under the surface to about a foot under the surface, maybe a little more than a foot. This is the kind of bait that fishes that zone perfectly. We know about topwaters. Topwaters stay on the surface. We know about spinner baits and chatter baits and diving crankbaits that dive to 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 feet, right? We know about those lures. We know about jigs and worms that we drag on the bottom. But that zone from just under the surface to maybe a foot or a foot and a half, that's a zone that doesn't get fished a lot. It's a zone that doesn't get talked about a lot. But wake baits are perfect for that application. You know, when would we want to fish a wake bait? When would we want to target that zone? Man, I can tell you that 3 of the 4 seasons, that zone is very, very important, okay? So spring, summer, and fall are all amazing times where a wake bait and fishing that top zone should be a consideration. In the winter, when your water temperature gets ultra cold, fish are more lethargic, they're feeding more down toward the middle to bottom of the water column, wake bait's not as good. But spring, summer, and all of fall, that thing is unbelievable. And it makes a lot of sense, right? Because think about that zone from just under the surface to about a foot. Fish feed in that zone all the time. Fish love to feed up toward the surface, but not necessarily on the surface, right? Look at the natural environment. Think about when you've been out and you've seen little minnows or shad, or you've seen a yellow perch that's, something's wrong with him, he's injured. They're not floating on the top, right? They're near the top, trying to get away. A lot of times they'll make little splashes, little dimples, little V-wakes. That's the perfect spot for that wake bait, right? So as a mimic of forage, I can't think of a better bait to mimic where a lot of that forage stays, which is just under the surface to about a foot or a foot and a half below, okay? So it's a great lure for covering that zone. Perfect lure for covering that zone. The other thing is it's a tremendous tool to fish just above the cover. And I want to explain this one a lot. And a lot of crankbaits or spinner baits or chatter baits, they want to dig in, right? Because the lure sinks, or a regular crankbait has a bill, right? Look, here's a DT6. Look at that bill. It's long, it's more horizontal. When you reel it, that long bill takes this lure to 6 feet. Well, in a lot of scenarios in heavy cover, that crankbait's going to bury into the cover, right? It's going to get into the grass, into the wood, the brush. It's going to bury itself. But what about a wake bait? Again, look at that bill. Look, short, stubby bill and very vertical, very up and down. When you reel this bait's going to stay just under the surface, maybe down to a little over a foot. And for that cover that we're talking about, imagine if that grass is grown up. It's hydrilla, it's milfoil, it's eelgrass, and it's grown up just under the surface. You can't fish a regular crankbait through it. What about a wake bait? Perfect. What about brush, submerged brush that comes up 4 or 5 feet off the bottom in 6 or 7 feet? You want to run a bait just over the surface of that brush. Regular crankbait dives too deep. Jig, worm, buries in it. Wake bait calls the fish up. This is a great bait for fishing over the cover, staying above the cover. What a great bait. Okay, so a wake bait is phenomenal. 3 seasons out of the year, clear water, stained water, even dirty water, this thing's great. I want to talk a little bit about the baits, and then I'm going to talk about the rod, the reel, and then guess what? This is going to be fun. Then I'm going to stop talking as much. We're going to put the trolling motor down, then we're going to show you how to fish these wake baits, okay? Again, a wake bait to me, what categorizes the bait as a wake bait is that bill. So any bill that's short, stubby, and very vertical is a wake bait. These are 3 of my favorite wake baits by Rapala. This is my first one, which is a sleeper. It's the most under-talked about lure in the entire Rapala DT series. And here it goes right here. It's a DT Fat 1. A DT Fat 1, which means it dives to 1 foot. That's it. And that's what a wake bait is, okay? I want you to look at that bait. That bait's big, it's round. I like to call this one like the hard-boiled egg because it almost looks like an egg. But when I'm mimicking bigger panfish species, right? Think about a bluegill, right? Think about a perch that has a fatter, wider body. Look at that. Perfect at imitating that, right? So DT Fat 1, when I want to imitate forage that's rounder, bluegill, crappie, rock bass, perch, it's a great one, okay? Number 2, I'm going to go in the opposite direction now for you, is another wake bait by Rapala. And this is called, look at this thing. This is called the BX Waking Minnow. BX Waking Minnow. Once again, how do you know it's a wake bait? Look at the bill. Short and stubby, almost near totally vertical, okay? And that bill is going to keep this bait from the surface down to a foot, maybe a foot and a quarter, a foot and a half. And this is a great one when you're trying to imitate bait that's longer, that's more slender. Look at that thing, right? So now I'm not talking about bluegill and crappie and rock bass. Now I'm talking about herring, minnows, smelt, forage that are long and thin. So great lure. This is the BX Waking Minnow. It's a great lure when your forage is longer. Same thing, 0 to 1, 1 1/4, 1 1/2 foot. All right, last but not least, this is one of my newer wake baits that I've been throwing, and I like it just as much. And this is a really cool bait. It's also in the BX series, but this is a BX Brat, and this is the BX Brat 3, okay? This is the BX Brat 3, and I want you to look at it. Even though this one looks more like a traditional crankbait, right? It has more of that square bill style body. Look at that short little stubby bill. Look at it. Look how little and short that is. And this bait's going to go 0 to 3 foot. But when we use heavier line with rod positioning, and we're going to talk about that when we start fishing, you could get this one to stay in that 0 to 1, 1 1/2 foot, just like the other two. The time I go to this little BX Brat is when the forage is little. And so when I get into a place and I have little tiny bait fish, little tiny bluegill, even little crawfish, small, that's a time when I'm gonna get away from these bigger baits and go to that little BX Brat with that little small stubby lip, okay? So there's our baits. All three of those are in my wake bait arsenal, okay? Let's get to rod and reel right now, because this is an important part of wake baiting. Wake bait is not the type of lure that you could just throw with any rod, reel, and line setup. It's a little more specialized. So I want to talk to you about the rod and reel setup. This is a rod by Abu Garcia that I specifically designed for both lipless baits and wake baits, okay? This is a 7/6 medium action delay rod. This is an Abu Garcia Ike Series 7/6 medium action delay rod. You're gonna see that delay printed right on the butt in green. And what does delay mean? Delay means, if you're familiar with the Abu Ike rods, it means this particular rod is composite. It's graphite and glass mixed together. So look at that soft tip. I don't even have to have a bait on there or have a fish on for you to see this softer tip. You've heard me talk about it before, how important that softer tip is when we're fishing treble hook style lures. Just like a topwater, that delay series, that composite, more parabolic rod, it's going to let you throw this wake bait really far, but more importantly, when that fish comes and eats it, he's going to get his whole mouth and lips around the bait before you pull it away from him. The other great thing, because all these lures are treble hook lures, is that parabolic rod. When that fish surges right at the boat, right? You're fighting the fish, he's trying to throw it. Some of these wake baits are pretty heavy. That rod's going to give to the fish that's fighting and jumping, and you're going to land a lot more fish, okay? So 7/6 medium action casting rods is what I want you to throw. The reason for the longer rod is wake baiting is for sure a technique where long casts are important. And as we get up and start fishing in a second on the trolling motor, you're going to see that almost every cast I make with a wake bait, whether it's the DT Fat or the Extreme Waking Minnow or it's the regular Brat, all my casts are long, okay? So 7/6 medium action delay series rod. And then on the reel, you know, I really like to match the gear ratio to the technique that I'm doing. If I had to pick one though, I prefer a faster gear ratio. This is the Abu Garcia Ike Revo in an 8/0-1. And the reason for that is I can have more variation in this reel, and I could do a lot of burning with that wake bait just under the surface, especially in clear water. So I like the 8/1, but if you notice the bite is on a slower retrieve, you could scale back to a slower ratio, something like a 6/6-1 Revo Ike. Okay, so rod, reel, here's the most important thing, okay? Here it goes, you ready? Line choice. Line choice for fishing this wake bait. Okay, listen to me, you ready for this? You hear me talk so much in my fishing about fluorocarbon. You hear me talk so much about braid, super lines, right? And even fluorocarbon as a leader on superline. But in my wake bait fishing, I want to use monofilament, mono line. Copolymer's okay too, but mono is the choice that I want for this style of fishing. The great thing about mono, if you look at the properties of mono, it floats. It's got a lot of buoyancy like braid, okay, which is what we want. Wake bait fishing, 0 to a foot, 0 to a foot and a quarter, right? We want the bait high. How do we help keep that bait high? With the line. So mono floats, but the reason we want mono and not braid is, you ready? You're even gonna be able to see it. Ready? Watch this. Look at that. You can see it. Stretch. Look at my hands expanding. You couldn't do that with Superline with braid. Braid has zero stretch. But mono, look at all that stretch. Look, that's a good 1/4 inch, maybe 3/4 inch of a difference when I pull that. And because wake baits are hard lures with treble hooks, we want stretch. We want stretch. And I want stretch because it puts a delay in my hook set. I also want stretch because when that fish is fighting and he's jumping near the boat trying to throw this thing, that line has a little bit of give to it. And we're going to land more of those wake bait fish, okay? All right, wake bait, you know it's a hard lure, you know the bill, you can identify it by a short, stubby, almost vertical style bill. We're gonna be able to fish it 3 months out of the year, spring, summer, especially fall. We're in the fall right now, the beginning parts of it. Last but not least, we talked about the rods, the reels, and the line, how important mono is for this technique. All right, I'm gonna tie a couple of these baits on. I'm gonna get up and start fishing these lures, and I wanna show you how versatile wake baits are. We're gonna fish hard cover with wake baits. We're gonna fish above soft cover. You're gonna see me fishing high above some of these grass beds. You're even gonna see me fishing some open water scenarios. And the great thing about wake baits is they draw fish up. Remember what we talked about. It's a great imitator of natural bait, and a lot of that bait naturally is high in the water column. A wake bait's gonna draw the fish up, and you're gonna get some exciting, explosive strikes. All right, let's tie some of these wake baits on, and then let's go fishing. All right, everybody, we've got some wake baits tied on, and now I wanna show you a few of the different scenarios where a wake bait is gonna work. I couldn't think of a better spot to start than right here, okay? And if you look out right where we're in a cove, we're in a pocket off the main lake, and this entire cove, this entire pocket, almost all the way out to the main lake, is a shallow, weedy flat, right? I'm looking down right now. The water depth right here is about 1.5 feet, might be about 2 feet as we go out, and there's short little grass. There's a little bit of scrub grass and coontail grass growing off the bottom. So what you have is you have a flat water environment that's very horizontal. This is the perfect kind of place where fish feed up, right? It's shallow. They've got no choice than to feed up, especially in clear water like what we have today. And this wake bait, the wake bait style lures, do an excellent job of covering water across these flats, especially these grassy flats. So, you know, we're gonna start fan casting the flat in front of us. One of the benefits of a wake bait, besides being a great imitator of fish, besides being a great fish catcher, the other side benefit is we can cover so much water. So I'm gonna start fan casting this flat and covering water with this wake bait. We're gonna start, this is the Rapala, this is the DT Fat 1. Again, you notice that real short, stubby bill on it, almost vertical. That's indicative of a wake bait. And on every cast with a wake bait, no matter what style, a long cast, a long throw is ideal, okay? So you're gonna see me start to bomb that cast. Look at how far that cast is out there. And when that wake bait first hits the water, you're gonna notice I just wait a couple seconds, okay? I wait 1 to 5 seconds before I start reeling. And then once that initial disruption starts, I'm gonna start retrieving this thing differently on every cast, okay? So you notice that one, I just probably did a medium retrieve. Remember, I'm fan casting. I'm going to target a little different area. I never want to cast the same place twice. I'm going to let it sit. There's 3 seconds. This cast, I might try a little bit slower retrieve. And I'm going to let the bait do the work, right? Let the bait do the work. Remember, the great thing about wake baits, look at me. I'm telling you, I'm in less than 2 foot of water right here, right? I've got a treble hook lure. I'm fishing over grass. Look, no grass, no scrub grass, no grass on the hooks, no algae, because that short stubby bill forces that wake bait to stay from the top to a foot, foot and a half down, okay? So I'm just gonna keep making fan casts. One of the things you're gonna see, I change my retrieve speed until I get that first bite. And that's gonna change until I get my first bite. But the one thing that won't, and I want you to really pay attention, is, look, ready? I'm always throwing pauses into this wake bait, especially in a scenario like this where there's no cover to bang off of, right? It's a flat with submerged grass. Letting it sit, 3 to 5 seconds, start my retrieve. Look at the pauses, ready? Pause, reel, reel, pause, reel, 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 pause. And I throw those pauses in there because I purposely want this wake bait to change direction. You know, when you're reeling it, it's got a nice rhythmic side-to-side vibration. Those pauses will interrupt that, and it'll stop and float up, and it'll start back again when you reel again. Just like other lures, like a spinner bait, like a chatterbait, like a square bill crankbait, changing direction, changing the retrieve is a trigger to get more bites, okay? So no matter how you're retrieving it, up until you get your first bite, I want you to always throw pauses into it, okay? Throw pauses into it. All right, the next thing I want to tell you about as we're fishing across this flat is how I can control this wake bait, all right? And you heard me say that wake baits are great from 0, that means the surface, down to a foot, a little more than a foot. How can I control that with that little stubby bill that's very fixed? And there's one answer to it. You ready? Here it goes. With my rod. You know, flash back to when we talked about our rod, we said a 7/6 rod, 7/6 medium action. That's a longer rod. The longer rod helps you with those long casts that you need, but the long rod also gives you better lure control. And simply put, here it goes. I want to show this to you. Simply put, you ready? I'll make a long cast. If I want this wake bait to stay very high in the water column, if I want it literally just waking the surface, dimpling the surface, look at my rod positioning. Look, 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 I'm purposely keeping my rod high. Look at it. Look at the bait out there. The bait is almost on the top. It's just barely under the surface, making it a V-wake. So by keeping my rod high, I keep that wake bait really close to the surface. But if I want to get that wake bait down a little bit, let's say I want to get it half a foot or a foot down, just barely touching this grass on this flat, then I do the opposite with my rod, right? Here it goes. Gonna make my long cast. Let it sit for 2 to 4 or 5 seconds. I start my retrieve. Instead of a high rod, this time I'm gonna do a low rod. And watch the difference. Look, ready? Look, there is no wake bait. You can't see it on the surface, but it's staying just above this grass. It's maybe riding down 3/4 of a foot down. And look, look. And as I get closer to the boat, I keep lowering my rod tip till finally it's at the boat. My rod's almost in the water. It's up and down. So to get a wake bait to stay below the surface, it's not diving deep, just below the surface in that zone. Look, I keep my rod tip down. purposely keeping it down. Same thing with the speed. I'm going to experiment with how that wake bait comes in, whether it's just on the surface like that. Show you again, look. Whether it's rod up, just on the surface, look at it, just waking, or do the fish want it below? Look, rod tip down. Look, you can't see the wake bait, right? I'm going to experiment with that until I get my first bite, right? So change your retrieve speed, change your rod positioning, always throw in the pauses until you get your first bite. And that's going to point you in the right direction. All right, I want to talk to you about another scenario that a wake bait can be phenomenal. We just fished over a giant flat, very shallow flat over top of submerged grass. Perfect scenario for a wake bait. But here's another one, which is around and over hard cover. If you notice what we've got coming up, we've got a boat dock right here. And boat dock is a phenomenal piece of cover for fish. Most anglers are skipping under the boat dock. They're fishing worms and shaky heads and jigs. But this wake bait is a great imitator of forage that stays higher in the column. Think about a dock, and I know you've seen it. You're looking down at a dock, you're sitting on the dock, you're swimming, and you see bluegills and minnows pecking at the top of the dock. The floats, the pilings, you see them pecking. A wake bait does a great job of imitating that. So around the cover, you're going to see me parallel this dock and over hard cover. So we have this dock, and then just out from this dock, there are submerged brush piles. The brush piles are about 4 or 5 feet of water, but they come up to within 2 feet of the surface. Once again, what an awesome bait, a wake bait, for fishing over the brush piles, drawing the fish out of the piles to hit that lure, rising up for the bait. So wake bait's great for shallow flats. It's great for fishing around and over hard cover as well. Main thing is I really want to try to get my cast parallel to that dock. I like to fish all the corners. So you're going to see me fish all 4 corners of this dock. Same thing, just like with the other wake bait, I like to let it sit for a second. And then once I start my retrieve, look at this. I'm going to reel and stop. I'm going to reel and stop. Throw them pauses in there. If I want the bait deeper, I keep my rod tip down. Now look at that. That was a little piece of vegetation that had plumed up. That caught me a little off guard right there. If I want that bait to stay lower, I'm going to have my rod tip down. I'm getting this little BX Brat 3. I'm probably getting it about 1.5 feet. Or if I want to keep this bait higher, it's going to hold my rod tip up. All right, let's try this brush out here now real quick. Once again, there's about 4 brush piles out here, and they're in 4 and 5 foot of water, but they come up really high. So I'm going to take this wake bait and fish it so it's over top of that brush, just barely ticking the very tops of that brush. For this one, I actually do want to get the wake bait down a little bit, so you're going to see me hold my rod tip down. Oh, wow. I hit that one. I hit that one. It scared me. Pretty clean out here too. It's got a little bit more tint to it, but Oh God, hit another one. Wow. I mean, that's what you want. I mean, this bait's only going, it's barely gone 2 feet down. You know, a normal crankbait, if I was trying to crank this, there he goes, big one on a wake bait. Big one on a wake bait, over top of that brush. Barely got down, it was just ticking it. Sticking that brush. There's our first fish of the day. See what we got. Uh oh, we got a different species, but that's okay. That's a great look. Even though this isn't a bass, I want to show you. We got a chain pickerel here. But it's a great look at why a wake bait works so well. That brush pile sees so many worms, so many jigs. It sees so many traditional lures that are in the brush. But a lot of times in cleaner water, fish feed up. That's not a bass, but that's a pickerel feeding up. Tick that brush pile, fish came up, ate it. Perfect example of why that wake bait is so good. Come on, that's the cast, here it comes. We get a nice ride over this one. There he goes. There he goes. He popped it when it came over the brush pile. You saw me, I almost got stuck for a second. Another nice fish, another wrong species. But once again, the effectiveness of a wake bait over cover. You know, not in the cover, but over it, drawing fish up. That's the power of a wake bait. That's a heck of a nice crappie right there. Man alive. All right, here's the last scenario where I love a wake bait. And we talked about a wake bait over shallow flats, especially flats with a little grass. We talked about a wake bait around hard cover, next to isolated targets, over brush, over timber. But the last place a wake bait is phenomenal is around structure change. And what I mean by that is a change in the bottom contour. So a wake bait over humps, a wake bait over long points, main lake points, and a wake bait over creek channels where the creek channel meanders through is a great place. Once again, it does an excellent job of drawing fish up, which is very natural. I just pulled up on an area here. It's really unique. It's a piece of structure change. In front of us, it looks like open water, but we actually have a hump. We have a high spot. It comes within a few feet of the surface. It's got 4 or 5 feet on the sides. Tremendous place to throw a wake bait. Tremendous. Oh my God. Ah, watch that bite, Calvin, get it! I watched it. I watched him stalk it. Oh, I watched him. Ah! Look at that. I watched that bite. It was so cool. Oh man. Unbelievable. Another non-bass, but look at that wake bait hanging out of his mouth. What a cool bite. I got to watch that fish stalk the wake bait. I talked about the pause, how important that was. I'm winding and winding. I see the fish behind it. So I keep winding, I keep winding. I see the fish behind it, I stop it. And when I stopped it and that bait just stopped for a second, it started floating, boom! He ate it, man. That was, what a cool bite. And you notice, I talked about the profile of baits. You know, we switched. We had been fishing fatter profile baits, and we went to this long one. This is the a BX minnow, a waking minnow. Look at the difference in body, right? Fat like an egg, more like a panfish. In this particular lake, there's a lot of yellow perch. Yellow perch. Look at that bait for imitating a yellow perch. Look at it. Fire tiger. Look, it's got bars on it. It's got a black back and orange belly. That's a yellow perch. So that's a good sign. Even though it wasn't a bass, that's a good sign. Wow, what a bite. All right, there you have it. Didn't end up with any bass, but we caught a lot of multi-species, and I hope that gives you an understanding of why a wake bait can be so good. For fishing that top zone, from the surface down to about 1.5 feet, man, this is the deal. Try a wake bait, put it in your lineup, put it in your arsenal. For fish that are feeding up, you can't beat it. I hope you enjoyed this in the shop. If you liked it, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button. Subscribe to the channel. We're gonna have new in the shops for you every week. If you're already subscribed, do me a favor. Tell your fishing buddy to subscribe to Mike Iaconelli Fishing on YouTube. We got great content coming to you every week.